Chapter 15. Fish picked himself up off the floor, and we all watched Lester climb down out of the bus, wondering what had made him grind to such a sudden halt. Fish, Bobby, Will, and I all slid into the seats across the aisle in order to look out the cracked or missing windows and see what Lester was up to. I thought for a second that maybe Lester had pushed that bus past 54 miles per hour and we'd broken down. But when I saw him talking to a tall lady next to a car with its hood propped up and its hazard lights on, I knew that he'd only stopped to help. The woman wore a long coat-like belted sweater that hung down past the hem of her old-fashioned green and white waitressing uniform. She was bigger and broader than Lester, with his narrow chest and caved-in shoulders. They made a funny pair, standing there. Lester moved around the woman's car, then tinkered and fiddled under the open hood for a short time. Occasionally, a car edged around us despite the stop sign and the bus's flashing lights. When Lester finally stood upright, he shook his head and pointed back over his shoulder. The woman contemplated the Heartland Bible Supply bus. When she saw our faces through the broken windows, she smiled like a small woman in a big woman's body and gave a little wave. Lester glanced up at us as well, and his face split into a funny, unexpected grin, looking for all the world like, despite the bickering and fighting and the damage to his bus, the more was the merrier. I think that if Lester had had a tail, it would have been wagging. Instead, he hooked his thumbs through the straps of his overalls and rocked back and forth on his heels. The woman gave her broken-down clunker of a car one good, satisfying kick. Then she allowed Lester to lead her up the 3 steep steps of the big pink bus, where he introduced her to us as though he'd just gotten hitched. "Kids, this here's Miss Lil Kittley, and she'll be riding with us as far as Emerald." We all looked from Lester to Lil, to each other, without a word. Fish shook his head and scowled. I knew what he was thinking, because I was thinking the same thing. One more adult to snoop in on our business, and another delay to keep us from getting to Papa. Lester's smile wavered, and his right shoulder danced up near his ear as he registered our unhappiness at the sight of Lil. He cleared his throat and tugged on his loosened, crooked pink tie. The bus was silent. Well, almost silent. "What do you know? Another stray," Rhonda scorned from Lester's arm. "Lester would take in a rabid hyena even after it bit him," said Carleen from the other. "You should know," grunted Rhonda. "You've always been such an old winch, Rhonda," said Carleen in her most graveled tone. "Well, it takes one to know one, I suppose," Rhonda snapped back. "Hi," said Lil, with another tiny little wave in our direction. "Are you all Lester's kidlings?" Bobby snorted and moved back to her original seat with a half-hearted humph. "You've got to be kidding. I would rather have been raised by wolves." "Naw," said Lester, hardly even hearing Bobby. "These kids are old friends of Lester's," I cut in, before Lester could pronounce us as stowaways. "I mean, he is a friend of the family. He's giving us a ride. Right, Lester?" Lester's smile skidded sideways, and he scratched both sides of his head at once, like that might jumpstart his brain and help him keep up, as my quick interruption had caught him off guard. Lil looked back and forth, from me to Lester, and I could tell she'd noticed Lester's confusion, but Lil didn't say anything, so I just grinned. Another car honked at us, wanting to pass. The bus was still parked there on the highway with its flashers on, and its stop sign extended. The added noise and pester fuddled Lester's brain even more, and I felt ashamed at how easy it was to steer the delivery man astray. My own smile slipped away as I pointed back and forth between Fish and me. "Our papa's in the hospital down in Salina," I said to Lil, with a twist in my stomach. Lil, who was obviously quite a bit smarter than Lester, was looking at me carefully. "Mr. Swan was at my birthday party today," I continued, trying hard to keep looking the woman in the eye. "The party was at our church in Hebron." I emphasized the last words to prompt Lester, but wasn't sure he was following my lead. "Yeah," Bobby broke in, almost cheerily. "Good old Lester was talking to my father. He's the pastor there in Hebron. He was delivering some Bibles and, when our dad," Will pointed from Bobby to himself, trying to help us as well, but picking up the thread of deception with less delight than his sister. "Well, when he found out that our good friend Lester here was headed back down to Salina, He said that Lester should take us all with him, finished Fish in a flat and final tone, as though that was the end of it. Lil looked at us all quizzically. I could tell she wasn't quite believing us. Lester, on the other hand, seemed somehow relieved, as though it suddenly all made much better sense to him why we were on board his bus, even if he didn't remember things in quite that way. Lester did his best, then, to introduce us kids to Lil, since he was now a friend of the family and all. Unfortunately, he didn't do too well, calling Fish Trout, and Will Jr. Bill Jr., and me Midge. He got Bobby's name right, but forgot to mention Samson. Or maybe he hadn't remembered Samson hidey-holing it under the cot. "It's nice to meet y'all," said Lil, with a slow, suspicious drawl. Then she settled down sideways, with her legs across the front seat of the bus, near Lester, hanging her large, white sneakers off the end of the bench, like a kid herself, and keeping her back to the window, so she could keep us all in sight. As Lester pulled the stop sign back in and turned off the bus's flashing lights, Lil's eyes strayed to the scratches on Fish's face and to Will's black eye. "You all look like you need a wash and a brush up. Are you sure this isn't the bus for the bad kids?" she said, eyeing the broken windows with a nervous laugh, too small for her body. "No, just the misfits," said Bobby. Lil smiled. "Then I should fit right in."